Story 1: The Echoes in the Hollow. I had been hiking alone through a part of the forest that locals called the Hollow, a name that carried a quiet warning no one ever explained directly. It was the sort of place where the trees leaned close, their gnarled branches twisting over the narrow paths like fingers, and the fog hung low, thick and clinging, muffling the normal forest sounds so that every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves seemed amplified. I'd come early, thinking the fog would make for good photographs, but the deeper I went, the heavier the air felt, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. At first, the hike felt like any other. Birds occasionally called in the distance, and my boots crunched on the moss-covered trail. Then, somewhere between the third bend and a small clearing, I heard it, the faintest whisper. My name, carried in a soft, trembling tone that I could barely catch. I stopped, heart skipping, and called out, but only silence answered. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, or the echoes of my own movements bouncing off the trees, but as I walked on, the whisper returned. Clearer this time, almost pleading. "Michael," it said softly, over and over. I froze, scanning the hollow in every direction, but the fog blurred the trees into shapeless grey masses. There were no footprints in the damp soil, no signs that anyone else had been there in days, maybe weeks. And yet, the voice persisted, wrapping around me like a cold hand. I felt my skin crawl. Shadows moved in the corners of my eyes, quick glimpses of something slipping between the trunks, but every time I looked directly, there was nothing. The sensation of being watched settled over me like a weight, pressing into my chest, making it hard to breathe. I started moving faster, picking up my pace, trying to put distance between myself and the unseen presence. But no matter which turn I took, the path seemed to twist back toward the same hollow, the same fog-choked clearing. It was as if the forest had folded in on itself, holding me inside a loop. I called out again, voice cracking with panic, but my words disappeared into the thick air, swallowed instantly. The whispers grew louder, almost desperate now, repeating my name over and over. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence pressing against my mind, urgent and cold. I stumbled, nearly tripping over a root, and when I looked up, the fog seemed to pulse around me, thickening, thinning, moving in ways that defied any logical explanation. I thought of turning back the way I'd come, but nothing felt familiar. Every tree looked the same, every bend in the trail mirrored the one before it. Fear clawed at me, but curiosity, or perhaps a foolish hope that I could confront whatever was calling me, kept me walking. The whispering followed, sometimes just behind me, sometimes in front, always persistent. Until I could no longer tell direction from distance, I realized with a sinking dread that it wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, patient and silent, waiting for me to slip up, to falter. My lungs burned, legs trembling, but the need to escape was stronger than exhaustion. After what felt like hours, though it could only have been 30 minutes, I stumbled onto the main trail, a stretch of dirt and gravel I recognized from before entering the hollow. The fog had lifted slightly, the normal sounds of the forest returning, a woodpecker, the distant rustle of deer through the underbrush. The voices stopped the moment I crossed the edge, leaving an unnatural silence behind them. And yet, the weight of being watched did not lift. I could feel it on my back for miles, in the spaces between trees, in the way shadows fell long and dark even in the morning light. The memory of the whispers, the feeling of unseen eyes, lingered with me in every quiet place afterward. Months have passed, and I've told people the hollow was just a trick of fog and imagination. But I know better. I still avoid that trail, and sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the wind rattles the windows, I can hear it again, soft, insistent, calling my name. The hollow doesn't want me back, not yet, but I can feel it waiting. Somewhere in those gnarled trees in the folds of the mist, something watches and remembers, patient as the fog itself. I'll never hike that path alone again. Not after what it whispered to me, not after the way it made me feel both lost and followed in the same breath. The forest keeps its secrets well, and I am only one of many who have learned that lesson the hard way. The cabin with no door. I was hiking through a remote section of the Appalachians, a trail I had stumbled upon while looking for a shortcut. The forest was dense here, older than most maps suggested, with trees leaning close as if whispering secrets to each other. The undergrowth was thick, and the trail narrowed to little more than a dirt groove, choked with roots and fallen leaves. I hadn't expected to find anything out of the ordinary, just a quiet morning to myself. The scent of pine and wet earth in the air. That was when I saw it. Half hidden by vines and brambles, tucked into a hollow of the hills, a cabin I could hardly believe existed. Its wood was grey and splintered, the roof sagging under years of neglect, yet it didn't look abandoned in the way old cabins usually did. It looked as if it had been waiting. The strangest thing, and what drew me closer with a mixture of fear and fascination, was that there was no door, just a black rectangle of open space, gaping into shadow. My first instinct was to keep walking, to ignore it and chalk it up to some forgotten structure, but curiosity won. I stepped inside, the air immediately shifting. It was heavier than outside, almost electric, the kind of oppressive stillness that makes your skin crawl. Dust coated the floor and walls, yet there was a single wooden chair, positioned dead center and facing outward toward the doorway. Around the chair, the floor had been swept clean, not a mark of a recent visitor, something more deliberate, like preparation, as if the chair had been waiting for me. I froze a moment staring at it. I didn't dare touch it, yet I felt the weight of being watched. I can't explain it, but there was a presence there, patient and silent, like the air itself was alive. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, but my feet seemed glued for a heartbeat. Then, instinct overrode fear, and I stumbled back out into the light. The cabin seemed to exhale as I stepped away, releasing me but not entirely letting me go. I found myself glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting the chair to have moved. To see something perched there waiting for the next visitor, like a predator in plain sight. As I made my way back through the woods toward my car, the forest around me felt different. Every shadow seemed heavier, every tree knotted and leaning closer than it had before. My mind tried to rationalize what I'd seen, the cabin, the chair, but nothing fit. There was no logical explanation, only the sense that the place was alive, aware of me, marking me in some imperceptible way. That night, in my small apartment back home, I dreamed of the chair. I could see it in the corner of my bedroom, perfectly positioned, watching. Even when I opened my eyes, it lingered in my peripheral vision, a silent accusation. I've thought about going back, rationalizing that maybe it was just an old cabin, a relic left to the forest, nothing more. But something stops me, not just fear, though that is certainly part of it. There's a feeling that it doesn't want to be found, yet once discovered, it claims a part of you that you can never retrieve. Walking near that hollow again, even in memory, sends a shiver down my spine. The way the vines hung, the unnatural shadow of the doorway, the stillness inside, it's lodged in my mind. It isn't just a structure, it's an idea, a presence that lingers in the air, waiting for the next person foolish enough to step inside. Months later, I still dream about it. The chair always facing me, always empty, yet somehow alive. I wake in the middle of the night, heart hammering, feeling watched by something I cannot see. Even the smallest movements in my apartment, the swaying of a curtain, the creak of a floorboard make me glance toward the corner where the chair exists in my mind. I can't shake it, can't convince myself it wasn't real. That cabin, that space, carries a quiet malice, the sort that doesn't shout or attack but waits, patient and eternal, shaping fear with absence rather than presence. I tell myself I'm overthinking it, that it was just a forgotten structure swallowed by the mountains, yet every instinct I have warns me otherwise. The hollow holds more than trees and moss. It holds the weight of attention, the quiet knowledge of being observed, and perhaps the memory of those who passed too close and dared to look in. I cannot say what would have happened had I stayed longer, dared to sit in that chair, or even touched it. Part of me never wants to know. What I do know is that some places are not meant to be seen, not meant to be understood, and that some things, even without voice or motion, can mark you in ways you'll carry for the rest of your life. Footsteps on the ridge. I woke before dawn that morning, hoping to catch the sunrise from a ridge trail outside a small Appalachian town I'd never visited before. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of pine and wet leaves, the kind of morning where everything feels sharpened and alive. The sky was just beginning to lighten, a pale grey creeping over the horizon, and I welcomed the quiet of the forest. I'd hiked alone plenty of times, but something about that ridge felt different. The trail was narrow and uneven, lined with rocks and twisted roots dropping sharply on one side. I had been moving carefully when I first noticed the sound. Soft footsteps, distant at first, crunching over leaves behind me. I froze, straining to hear, my breath shallow. I called out, expecting maybe another hiker or a ranger, but no voice answered. Just the forest and the soft, deliberate steps. I turned slowly, trying to catch a glimpse of someone, anything, but there was nothing. The trees were still, the fog curling low around the roots. I started walking again, faster now, brushing off the creeping unease as imagination. But the footsteps followed, always keeping pace, never faltering, echoing my every movement. My heartbeat thudded in my ears, but the sound behind me matched mine perfectly, as though whoever, or whatever, was there had memorized the rhythm of my steps. Panic set in, cold and sudden, and I began to run. The trail twisted sharply, narrowing into a path barely wide enough for one person. The ridge dropped steeply to one side, the wind whistling through the pines, carrying a chill that felt deeper than air. The footsteps behind me quickened, perfectly synchronized, never faltering. I turned corners desperately, thinking I could lose them, but each twist of the path brought me back toward the same ridge, the same precarious trail. Shadows stretched along the slopes, and I could feel the eyes of the forest pressing in, watching, following, aware of my every move. My breath burned my lungs, my legs trembled, and yet the steps remained, constant and mocking. Finally, through a gap in the trees, I saw the clearing where I had parked. Relief flooded me, and I sprinted the last stretch, boots slipping on wet leaves. When I reached the edge of the clearing, the footsteps stopped. Silence enveloped me like a heavy blanket. I tried to shake the tension from my body, telling myself it was just someone walking the same trail, someone behind me who had turned back. But then, it happened. Soft, almost tender, a whisper right in my ear. "Michael." My blood froze. I spun around, searching the clearing, the trees, the ridges in the distance. There was no one, only the wind rustling through branches, only the dim grey light of early morning. I didn't wait. I threw my pack into the car and drove away without looking back, the whisper lingering in my mind like smoke. Even now, thinking about that ridge makes my skin crawl. The sound of footsteps in leaves, the way they mirrored my own, the way the forest seemed to fold and twist around me. It feels like it follows me still. I can't explain what I heard, what I felt. But I know the ridge holds more than just trails and trees. There is an attention there, a patience, a quiet insistence that I do not understand. Weeks later, I returned once with friends, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of fog and echo, maybe another hiker too far ahead to see. But the trail felt different, unnatural, as if it remembered my last visit and didn't want me there again. Every corner, every twist seemed longer, sharper. I couldn't shake the feeling that the ridge itself had shifted while I wasn't looking, that it could trap someone if it wished. I left quickly, driving home with a sense of unease pressing into my chest, silent but relentless. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I hear a rhythm in my dreams, the soft, echoing steps of that morning. They aren't mine, but they follow me, perfectly measured. A reminder that the ridge is still there, still patient, still waiting. I can never hike that trail alone again. Even the idea of it makes my palms sweat, my neck tighten, my heart jump. It isn't just the forest or the trail or the path. It is the memory of being watched, the awareness that someone or something was pacing me, tracking my every movement with a patience I cannot comprehend. I can't say what I would have done if the footsteps had closed the gap, if the whisper had grown louder, if the forest had decided not to release me. All I know is that it has left a mark, an invisible weight I carry with me on every walk in the woods, every step on a ridge, every time the wind moves in the pines. That ridge is alive in a way that terrifies me, not with monsters or threats I can see, but with observation, with intent, with the quiet knowledge that some places in these mountains are older and wiser than any human. The sound of footsteps, the echo of my own pace, the whisper of my name, they are still there, in the corners of my mind, as vivid as that foggy morning, as haunting as the wind in the pines. I do not know what I encountered, and I fear I never will. But I know it exists, patient and watchful, and I will never walk that ridge alone again. I had set out before dawn, wanting to catch the sunrise from a ridge trail near a small Appalachian town, a place I'd hiked before, but never at this hour. The forest was quiet, the wind carrying the familiar scent of damp leaves and pine, the kind of sharp, earthy smell that fills your lungs and makes you feel awake. I kept my pace steady, boots crunching softly against the frost-covered soil. But then I noticed it, a sound almost too faint to identify at first. Soft footsteps following mine. I paused and turned quickly, scanning the dim light, but the trail behind me was empty. I told myself it was probably another hiker, maybe someone who had started even earlier. But the forest remained still, except for the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I picked up my pace, trying to shake the feeling, but the footsteps followed, keeping perfect rhythm with my own. My heart started to pound, each beat echoing the panic that was growing inside me. Every time I slowed, the steps did too. Every time I ran, they matched me. It was impossible. They mirrored me so precisely, it was as if something unseen was tied to my movements. The ridge trail narrowed, twisting sharply between dense thickets and jagged rocks. Shadows stretched in the early light, seeming to reach out with every movement I made. I stumbled at one sharp turn, nearly hitting the dirt, and that's when I realized the steps were no longer just behind me. They were all around me, invisible, pressing in, patient and relentless. Fear clawed at my chest, and I broke into a run, desperate for the clearing where my car waited. The trail seemed to wind in on itself, bending and looping in ways I didn't remember. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I could not stop. Finally, I burst into the clearing, sunlight just spilling over the horizon, and the footsteps stopped. Relief should have washed over me, but instead, there was a hush in the air, a weight pressing against my senses. Then it came, a whisper, low and deliberate, right in my ear, saying my name. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing, only the trees swaying gently in the morning breeze and the trail that had led me here. The sound of my own ragged breathing was the only proof I had survived the encounter. Even now, weeks later, the ridge haunts me. I cannot hike there alone without remembering the echo of those invisible footsteps, the way they moved with me, step for step, and the whisper that reached into the core of my mind. That ridge is no longer just a trail, it is a presence, patient and watchful. And I have learned that some paths in the Appalachian woods are not meant to be walked alone. The Whispering Creek. I had been hiking through a dense stretch of Appalachian forest I didn't recognize, trying to follow a faint game trail I thought might lead to a ridge I'd seen on the horizon. The woods were thick here, older and darker than most maps suggested, the trees towering and gnarled, their roots tangled in the mossy ground. I was following the sound of the wind through the pines when I stumbled across a narrow creek cutting silently through the underbrush, a place I was certain I'd never seen before, though I had walked these mountains many times. The water was unnaturally still, like glass laid over shadows, reflecting the fading twilight in a way that made it hard to gauge depth or movement. I leaned over, curious, and for a moment the only sound was the soft trickle of leaves brushing the surface. Then I thought I heard something else, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like the creek itself was speaking. At first I told myself it was the wind, rustling through leaves, or the echo of my own footsteps on the wet stones. But as I walked along the bank, the whispering became clearer, shaping itself into words, calling out warnings I didn't understand. It spoke names, people I had never met, places I couldn't place, and details that made no sense but carried the weight of truth. I stopped, heart hammering, straining to see if anyone was nearby, but there was no one. Just the creek, still and silent, reflecting the deepening shadows. The whispers didn't stop. They circled me, threading through my thoughts, turning my own mind against me. Every step I took along the bank seemed to pull me deeper into their rhythm, the quiet insistence of voices blending with the cold of the water and the darkening forest. I tried to turn back, to retrace my path, but the trail had vanished under overgrowth, the underbrush closing in like it had absorbed the path behind me. The whispers seemed to anticipate my movements, twisting and overlapping, impossible to untangle. I stumbled over a root, nearly falling into the creek, and the voice changed pitch, rising and falling like it was mocking me, guiding me and warning me all at once. The forest itself felt alive, pressing down from above, silent but heavy, letting me know I was being watched. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and frantic, echoing against the water, and yet it was drowned out by the murmurs that pressed against my mind. Hours must have passed. I don't know if it was minutes or hours. Time itself seemed to warp along that bank. The whispers receded just enough that I could breathe, though the weight of them lingered, curling in the edges of my vision like smoke. Finally, through the thick tangle of trees, I saw a faint road cutting through the woods. Relief surged, sharp and hot, and I ran toward it, the sound of gravel underfoot grounding me in a reality I thought I had left behind. When I finally emerged, sun fully risen and the forest behind me silent, I looked back. The creek was just water, perfectly still, reflecting the morning light, and yet I knew it had not been that simple. There was a feeling, a presence, a cold weight that had followed me from the bank, lingering at the edges of my vision even as I drove away. In the days and weeks after, I could not shake it. The memory of the creek has never left me, not as a place I walked, but as a sensation pressing into my chest and my mind with an insistence I can't explain. Sometimes when the wind shifts through the trees near my home, I swear I hear the faintest whispers in the quiet hours before dawn. Names, fragments of warnings, syllables I don't recognize, yet they feel familiar in the deepest part of my mind. I cannot explain what I experienced, cannot give it reason or shape. All I know is that the creek exists somewhere in the folds of the forest, patient and still, waiting to pull another person into the rhythm of its whispers. I have tried to return to the place to see if it can be found again, but the path has vanished entirely. I've spoken to locals, asked about hidden creeks or forgotten streams, and no one remembers one matching the description. The silence and the stillness of that water. The way it reflected the fading light, like a mirror holding shadows instead of sky. It has never left me. Every time I think I am safe, walking along a normal creek or pond, I am reminded of it. The unnatural stillness, the way the air presses down, the quiet that is not quiet. It is patient, alive in a way that does not move but watches, and it waits for those who come too close. I can still feel the memory of it pressing into my thoughts, a cold insistence I cannot shake. The creek isn't just a creek. It is an experience, a presence, a weight in the mind that reminds me how small and unprepared one is in these woods. I cannot walk that part of the forest again. Even talking about it, even writing these words, brings the same feeling of tightness in my chest, the same weight on my mind, as if the whispering has never fully ended. It lingers still, a reminder that some places are more than they seem, carrying a quiet dread that no map can capture, no trail can mark, and no amount of sunlight can erase. I had been exploring a dense section of Appalachian forest I didn't recognize, wandering off the beaten trails in search of quiet and solitude. The sun was low, brushing the treetops with amber light, when I stumbled across a narrow creek cutting silently through the woods. It was odd. I had hiked these mountains countless times, yet this stream was nowhere on any map I owned. The water was perfectly still, like a sheet of dark glass reflecting the last hints of twilight, and the surrounding trees leaned inward as if trying to hide it. I stepped closer, curious, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots sounding unnaturally loud in the otherwise still forest. At first, the only sound was the gentle lapping of water over stones, but then I thought I heard something else. A whisper, soft and faint, almost as if the creek itself was speaking. I froze, scanning the bank and the trees, but there was no one. I shook my head, telling myself it must be the wind or the echo of my own movements, yet the whispering grew clearer, forming words I could almost understand. They weren't coherent at first, just fragments, faint names and half-finished warnings. Then the sentences became distinct, calling out people I had never met, warning of things I couldn't possibly know, painting images that made no sense and yet carried a weight that chilled me to my core. I tried to step away, retracing my path to the trail, but the whispers followed, twisting and circling in my mind. Every attempt to leave only seemed to pull me deeper into their rhythm, the words wrapping around my thoughts, cold and pressing. The forest grew heavier, the shadows longer, and I felt as though the trees themselves were leaning closer, straining to hear the murmurs as they pressed against my ears. I quickened my pace, yet every footstep echoed back with the whispers, the sentences bending to my movement, feeding into my growing panic. Hours, or perhaps only minutes, I can't say, passed before the forest finally gave way to a faint, worn road. I stumbled onto it breathless, shaking, disoriented. The whispers faded, but the feeling remained, a lingering pressure at the edges of my mind, as though the creek had imprinted itself into my memory. Even now I can close my eyes and feel the same cold weight, the same circling insistence. And I know that this place is not just water and trees. It is something else, something patient, pressing, and aware. That creek has never left me. It is not the image I remember, the still water or the bent trees, but the sensation it left behind, the whispering that pressed into my mind and refused to let go. I can walk past ordinary streams without a shiver, but this one exists in a corner of my consciousness that I cannot erase. It reminds me that some places in the mountains are not bound by time or reason, that silence itself can carry intent, and that some encounters leave marks far deeper than the forest floor. The abandoned schoolhouse. I had been hiking along a worn trail near an old Appalachian town, the kind of place where every bend in the forest seems to whisper forgotten stories. When I first saw it, a schoolhouse hidden deep among the trees, its paint long peeled away and its roof sagging under years of neglect. I had passed through this area countless times, or so I thought, but this building had somehow escaped notice. Something about it pulled at me, a mix of curiosity and unease, and I found myself leaving the trail to approach it. The air grew heavier the closer I got, thick with dust and the faint, almost tangible smell of decay, the kind of smell that clings to the edges of memory long after the source is gone. The doors were cracked and warped, hanging slightly ajar, revealing the interior swallowed by shadows. I stepped inside carefully, boots crunching over broken glass and splintered wood. Desks lay overturned, chalkboards cracked, and forgotten papers littered the floor like a scattering of whispers from the past. It felt abandoned, and yet the air seemed to move around me, almost breathing. I froze when I thought I heard it. A faint, high-pitched sound, the unmistakable laughter of children. It came from somewhere deeper in the building, echoing across the hallways and empty rooms. I called out softly, my voice sounding absurdly loud in the silence, but the laughter stopped immediately, leaving a hollow that pressed against my chest. I moved forward, drawn by a mix of fear and fascination, my eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through shattered windows. That's when I noticed the footprints in the dust, small, faint, and impossibly fresh. They led from one broken doorway to another, winding through the classroom. Yet each time I tried to follow them, they seemed to vanish into thin air, as though the floor itself swallowed them. My skin crawled as shadows flickered across the walls, shadows that didn't match any tree or beam, shifting in ways that made me question the angle of the light. The air grew colder, heavier, each breath pressing against my lungs like invisible hands. I tried to convince myself it was the wind, or my imagination, or some trick of memory feeding on old fears, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. I could sense eyes in every dark corner, lingering on me, patient and unblinking. The laughter returned, soft and distant, drifting through the hallways, impossible to locate. It was playful, yet not innocent, carrying a tone that suggested it was aware of me, aware that I was intruding. Panic rose, but it was tempered by fascination. I wanted to see, to understand what lingered here, yet I feared that moving closer would mean stepping into something I could never leave. I turned, retracing my steps toward the entrance, but the building seemed to shift. Hallways stretched longer than before, corners bent at angles that shouldn't exist, and doors that had been opened now appeared sealed. The echo of laughter followed me, circling, coming from every direction at once. I could feel the weight of something unseen pressing into my back. A quiet insistence that I stay, that I notice, that I remember. I stumbled out onto the porch, boots slipping on rotting boards, and for a moment, the forest seemed ordinary again, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves. But the sensation of being observed did not leave. It trailed me into the trees, following me along the trail as if the building itself had extended its reach. Even now I cannot pass near that area without a tightening in my chest, a shiver running down my spine. Sometimes, when I catch the wind at the right angle, I swear I hear faint laughter drifting through the trees as though the schoolhouse had never left, as though it was still waiting, still observing, still aware. I have tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the echoes of the past, the creaking of old wood, but the memory feels too real, too tactile, the footprints, the shadows, the weight of eyes I could not see. They remain imprinted on my mind, as sharp and immediate as the moment I stepped inside. There is a quiet dread in knowing some places do not let go of those who pass through them. The schoolhouse exists as a memory now, yet it presses on me, an unseen presence, patient and watchful. I cannot explain what I saw, or if what I saw was even real, but I know it lingers. The forest holds it in place, preserving the echoes, and I carry the knowledge that some things, once noticed, cannot be unseen. The abandoned schoolhouse is not just a building, it is a witness, and I, a trespasser, will never forget the way it watched, the way it spoke without words, and the way it followed me out into the quiet Appalachian woods. I had been hiking near a forgotten stretch of Appalachian woods when I first noticed the ruins of an old schoolhouse, partially hidden by thick undergrowth and leaning trees. The building had clearly been abandoned for decades. Paint peeled from the walls, windows broken, the roof sagging under the weight of time. Curiosity pulled me closer, despite a vague sense of unease that prickled along my spine. The air around the schoolhouse smelled stale, heavy with dust and rot, and each step on the fallen leaves seemed louder than it should have been. I pushed the front door open cautiously, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, desks were overturned, chalkboards splintered, and papers littered the floor like ghosts of a long-forgotten class. I paused, trying to imagine the place when it had been full of life. Children's voices echoing down the halls. Then I heard it, faint laughter. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the broken windows, or the echo of my own footsteps, but the sound had a rhythm and warmth that the wind could never create. It was soft, almost playful, yet there was something wrong about it, an undertone I couldn't place. I called out, my voice cracking in the stillness, but the laughter stopped abruptly. Silence returned, thick and heavy, pressing against me from every direction. I stepped further inside, noticing faint footprints in the dust, small, light, and impossibly recent. They wound through the main room, around the scattered desks, and then disappeared entirely, as if whoever or whatever had made them simply vanished into thin air. My stomach tightened, and I realized I was not alone. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision, teasing me, moving when I wasn't looking directly. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. I wanted to flee, but something held me, a quiet insistence, the sensation that the building itself was aware of my presence and was observing my every movement. I edged back toward the door, heart hammering, every creak of the floor echoing in the cavernous space. When I finally stepped out into the morning light, the forest seemed impossibly bright and normal, but the weight of unseen eyes lingered, pressing on my back as I walked away. Even now, weeks later, I can't pass that section of the woods without feeling the same unease, the same invisible presence that haunted me in the schoolhouse. The laughter, the footprints, the shifting shadows, they are etched into my memory. The building no longer stands as just ruins. It exists as a lingering sense of observation, a reminder that some places remember, some places watch, and some encounters cannot be forgot. The lantern in the pines. I'd started my hike late that afternoon, hoping to catch the last stretch of sunlight filtering through the pines, the air cool and sharp with the scent of damp needles and earth. The forest was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The usual chatter of birds and rustling wildlife subdued beneath the thick canopy. I was following a narrow trail, barely visible in the fading light, when I noticed it. A faint flicker between the trees, like a candle or lantern being carried just beyond the reach of my vision. At first, I thought it might be another hiker, someone moving ahead on the trail, but as I adjusted my eyes, I realized there was no one, just the light, bobbing gently, almost deliberately, as though it wanted me to notice it. Curiosity pulled me forward, the kind of curiosity that feels both foolish and irresistible. I veered off the trail slightly, careful not to disturb the undergrowth, and followed the lantern deeper into the trees. Every time I tried to turn away, to convince myself it was pointless or imagined, it seemed to appear farther ahead, just beyond my reach, moving through the shadows with a persistence that unsettled me. The forest grew darker, denser, the trunks pressing close, and I began to notice how unfamiliar the path had become. Rocks and roots shifted in ways I didn't remember, bends I hadn't seen on the trail before. It was as if the forest itself had reshaped, folding around me, guiding me along a route I couldn't recognize. The light seemed almost alive, pulsing gently, urging me forward, coaxing me deeper into the pines. I could hear the soft snap of twigs beneath my boots, the occasional rustle of leaves, but nothing else. No animals, no wind, no distant sound of roads or civilization. My heart started to pound in my chest, a rhythm in sync with the sway of the lantern, and I realized I had been following it longer than I thought. Time had lost all meaning. Every step forward led me farther into the woods, and every glance back revealed the trail I thought I had known was gone, replaced by tangle and shadow. I tried to shout, to call out to anyone, but my voice seemed swallowed by the thick pines, absorbed before it could reach anyone or anything. Hours seemed to stretch in a way I could not measure. The lantern bobbed ahead, patient, silent, unhurried, and I began to notice the way the shadows around it shifted, stretching longer, curling, closer. As if the light itself was pulling at the edges of the forest, reshaping it around my movements. Panic began to seep in, sharp and insistent. I wanted to turn back, to leave, but every direction I tried led me deeper, and every time I thought I had left it behind, the lantern appeared farther along the path, guiding me, herding me, keeping me moving. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but the compulsion to follow was stronger than my fear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the trail opened slightly, the pines thinning into a small clearing I recognized as the edge of the area I had been hiking earlier. Relief surged, hot and sudden, and I broke into a run, thinking I had escaped the lantern's pull. When I looked back through the thinning trees, it was gone, vanished without a trace. No glow lingered in the shadows. No movement betrayed the presence that had guided me. The air felt lighter, almost normal, yet the memory of it, the way it moved, the way it seemed alive, patient and deliberate, stayed with me, pressing into my thoughts long after I'd left the forest. Even now I can feel the pull of that light in quiet moments, the memory of being lured, coaxed and guided through the trees. It wasn't threatening in the way one expects from danger, but there was a quiet insistence to it, an unnatural will that suggested the forest had a patience and awareness far beyond what I understood. I have returned to that ridge once since, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of twilight, a flicker of reflection on wet leaves or distant eyes catching the dying sun. But the forest was silent and still, and I never found that path again. The memory of the lantern is not tied to the woods themselves. It lingers in my mind, a sensation, a reminder that some places in the mountains are not bound by reason or distance, and that some things can pull at you without force, without sound, without leaving any trace at all. I cannot explain what I followed that evening. I cannot say if it was real in any sense that matters, or if I was merely lost in the quiet, watching shadows twist between the trees. What I know is that the feeling of being guided, of being coaxed deeper into something I did not understand, was real. It left a weight in my chest, a shadow in the corner of my vision, a shiver in my spine whenever I think of that evening. The lantern disappeared, yes, but the memory of it, the strange, deliberate light moving through the thick pines, the feeling of being drawn into the forest against my will, never leaves. I have learned to avoid that ridge alone, to avoid the deep pines as dusk falls, and yet the lantern's pull is something I cannot erase from my mind. It is patient, quiet, and eternal, and I cannot shake the sense that it still waits, somewhere in the shadows, ready to appear for the next traveler who dares to follow its glow. I had been hiking alone through a thick section of Appalachian forest as dusk began to settle over the ridges, the fading light filtering through the pines in long, golden streaks. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles, the kind of smell that makes you feel both alive and exposed. That's when I saw it. A flickering light moving between the trees, like a lantern being carried along a hidden path. At first, I thought it was another hiker, someone returning to their camp before nightfall, but as I drew closer, I realized the forest was empty. The light moved deliberately, bobbing slightly as if beckoning me forward. Curiosity pulled me deeper into the trees, my boots crunching over twigs and fallen needles. Every time I tried to turn away, the lantern seemed to appear farther along the path, guiding me onward. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a reflection of the dying sun on a distant patch of glass or metal. But the way it moved made that impossible. It seemed purposeful, almost alive, leading me along a narrow trail that I did not recognize. The shadows grew longer, stretching across roots and rocks, and the forest felt suddenly more oppressive, as if leaning in to watch my every step. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. The trail twisted in ways I didn't remember, doubling back on itself. Yet the lantern remained ahead, a patient and silent guide. My legs burned, my lungs ached, and my pulse hammered in my ears, but I could not break free from the strange compulsion to follow. I felt as though the forest had folded itself around me, reshaping each turn and bend to keep me on this endless path. Every sound seemed amplified, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, all echoing through the trees, mixing with the faint bobbing light. Finally, I stumbled out of the dense pines into a familiar clearing, where the trail opened onto the road I had parked on. The lantern was gone, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the fading twilight behind. Relief should have come, but instead there was a lingering unease, a sense that the forest had not truly released me. The memory of being coaxed deeper into the woods, of being led by that patient, flickering light, pressed against my mind with a weight that would not lift. Even now, thinking about that evening makes my chest tighten. I cannot pass through those woods alone, especially at dusk, without recalling the lantern's deliberate movements, the way it seemed to pull me further into the forest, and the way the trail twisted unnaturally under my feet. The light was gone, but the feeling it left remains, persistent, quiet, and unshakable, as if the woods themselves were still watching, waiting for the next traveler to follow it where I did. The shadow on the trail I had been hiking alone all morning, following a steep trail that wound through the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of path where every tree and rock feels older than you, carrying the weight of decades and generations. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth, the kind of smell that makes you feel alive in a way that's both comforting and unnerving. Birds called in the distance. A few squirrels darted across fallen logs, and for hours I felt the solitude as a quiet blessing. That is, until I noticed the shadow. At first, I didn't think much of it, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, but it moved in perfect parallel to me, keeping pace as I climbed higher along the ridge. I stopped, squinting toward the spot where I thought I had seen movement, expecting to see another hiker, someone taking the same trail, but there was no one. Just the trees, the rocks, the steep slopes, and that flicker of darkness that always seemed to be slightly behind me, slightly to the side. I shook my head and continued, trying to ignore it, thinking it must be a trick of the sunlight falling through the branches or my mind playing games after hours of isolation. But every time I looked directly at the place I thought the shadow was, it vanished, only to reappear when I looked away in the corner of my vision, sliding along the trail like it had been there the entire time. As the sun began to lower itself toward the horizon, the shadow seemed to stretch, elongating across rocks and roots in ways that didn't match the angles of the trees or my own figure. I tried to quicken my pace, but it matched me, step for step, always beside me, always just out of reach. My heart started to pound, not from the climb or the exertion, but from a creeping sense of being followed, studied. I could feel it more than I could see it, a presence just beyond awareness, patient and deliberate. I called out, my voice echoing in the steep valley, but no reply came. And the shadow did not falter. The trail twisted, sharp turns and narrow ridges, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than forward. The forest seemed to close around me, the trees leaning in, their branches scratching at one another like whispers in the wind. The shadow followed every turn, every stumble, maintaining its silent rhythm, never overtaking me, never revealing itself fully. I wondered if it had been there all morning, silently pacing me through the woods. Waiting for some moment of fatigue or distraction, the thought made my skin crawl. Eventually, the trail opened to a clearing, and through the trees, I saw the faint glint of my car, parked where I had left it. Relief should have washed over me, but instead, I felt a weight pressing on my back, a tightening in my chest, as though the shadow had traveled every step with me, unyielding, and only paused now because I had reached the edge of its chosen territory. I sprinted the last few yards, boots scraping gravel, the forest behind me dark and silent, yet the feeling of being followed lingered. Even as I locked the car door and slid inside, the shadow felt near, patient and waiting, the memory of it etched into my mind like a second skin. That evening, driving away, I kept glancing at the tree line, expecting it to step into view, to reassert itself. Nothing appeared, but the unease remained. Even now, thinking about that hike makes my chest tighten, my palms sweat, and my mind replay the angles of the trail, the way the shadow had moved in perfect synchrony with me. It wasn't just a trick of light or a reflection or some misjudged tree branch. It was something deliberate, patient, and unexplainable, a presence in the woods that had chosen to accompany me without consent. Since that day, I refused to hike alone. The mountains are beautiful, yes, and wild, but they hold things I cannot name, cannot predict, and cannot ignore. The shadow on that trail didn't attack, didn't speak, didn't reveal itself fully, but it left me with a knowledge I cannot shake, that in these woods you are never truly alone. There is something patient, persistent, capable of following every step without being seen, and even when it disappears, it waits. And I know, in a way that chills me, that it always will.